Welcome everyone, I'm Rod. Thanks for joining me for part 4 of the Legal Truth series. It's been a while coming, but I finally got some time together that I could get it done. So I appreciate you joining me. Today we're gonna ask the question, what is a variant? Why do we want to know what a variant is? Well, it's kind of an interesting word, and it's a very powerful and impactful word that's used to classify and reclassify firearms in Canada. Now, the term variant appears around 90 times in the firearms regulation, but yet it doesn't appear even once in firearm legislation. So just so, in case you're not aware of how it sort of works, I'm not a authority on legislation, or I'm not a lawyer or whatever, but here's the short strokes on how this works. Legislation is the law. When there's a problem or we're trying to prevent problems, we're like, okay, we need a new law. Legislation is drawn up, it goes through the House of Commons, and our elected representatives vote on it. In the legislation, there's usually a little clause that says, or as defined in regulation. It's a back door, and it's a back door that's left in there so that people, without anyone even knowing or voting or anything, can actually change the law, and it carries the full force and effect of the actual legislation itself. So I want to draw attention as we go through this whole subject. I want to draw attention to one point in particular, and I think it's really important. When the Firearms Act came into force, the RCMP declared authority to classify firearms or to determine their classification or to determine whether they're variants or not. They weren't given this authority in Bill C-68. They declared it and took it for themselves. Now, it seems like a natural fit because they're a federal agency. They're the largest police force in Canada. You'd think if anybody would know a lot about firearms and their impact on public safety and how dangerous they may or may not be, it would be the RCMP. So I can see why people thought that that was a natural fit. Even today, even through everything that I've told you in part 3 of the Legal Truth series about firearm classification, and everything I'm going to tell you today, the mainstream media and the political class still support the RCMP in having this right, or having this, whatever you want to call it, this authority.
They have no legislative authority to make these determinations.
Well, this is the rub. I mean, neither of you guys support, hang on.
Repeatedly, Evan, okay. Repeatedly, they have shown they don't have the competence to do this.
Well, hang on. Some Canadians might say the RCMP should have the competence to decide what the firearms classification should be. I mean, this is the case. I know gun owner lobbyists and activists are saying, no, they're incompetent. But the RCMP says, hey, under the bill, we classify what firearms are prohibited. We don't think they should be out there. We're putting it on the prohibited list. What's wrong with that? The RCMP's job is not to protect gun owners. Their job is to protect society, and they think this protects society, not necessarily the kind of gun you get to have in your closet.
I agree. They think that's what protects society, but this is not something that actually protects society.
Tony Bernardo.
Yeah, Evan, what the RCMP might think is irrelevant. They have no legislative authority within C-68 to make these determinations.
But they've been making them.
I know.
And the government hasn't challenged them.
But that's the problem.
Now, with the help of the good people over at Lever Arms Service in Vancouver, British Columbia, I went down there and I was able to film an on-location video to show you guys in real life how the term variant is used in firearm regulations to reclassify or to classify firearms. Today we have one of the most notorious situations, which is the Army Yager AP-80, which is a .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle, and it was declared to be a variant of the AK-47. So they do appear to be the same, but there's some real distinct differences.
Yeah, this is kind of a pretty typical story of the way the Firearms Act was implemented. Back when the mass reclassifications took place in the early 1990s, the idea was to severely control, restrict, and prohibit all military-style rifles. And basically, the governments of the day, the Progressive Conservative government, the early 1990s, and of course later the Liberals, basically told the firearms bureaucrats, restrict and then prohibit as much as this stuff as possible. Anything that was sort of military look-alike, of military origin, was to be banned and later confiscated. Now, under Bill C-17 in 1991, a great number of sort of military-style semi-automatics were restricted. Some others were prohibited. There were a number of prohibitions that took place under C-17, but the majority of those firearms were simply declared restricted. They had to be registered, and they would be controlled like handguns. And this was in the 1991-1992 period. When all these guns were reclassified in the early 1990s, the bureaucrats who wrote the legislation basically threw everything into the mix. Anything that looked like was an AK-47, a semi-automatic AK-47, was an AK variant, and therefore. Now, the AP-80 is not actually named as a variant of the AK in the legislation. It is actually considered a variant of a variant. It's a variant of the Mitchell Arms 22. So therefore, it was considered to be a variant of a variant and controlled the same way as all restricted at the time and later prohibited AKs.
So true or false, the AK-47 has a gas system.
Yes.
And a gas piston.
Yes.
And a recoil spring.
It does.
The AP-80 uses direct blowback.
Yeah, it's a blowback. It's very similar to a Ruger 1022, which is still a non-restricted rifle in Canada.
Are the receivers interchangeable?
No.
Do they use the same type of action?
No.
Can this barrel be widened to accommodate a 7.62 by 39 round?
No.
Do they use the same ammunition?
No.
The AK-47 is 7.62 by 39, and the AP-80 is 22 long rifle. So there's a difference in the cartridge there. Can the bolts be interchanged?
No.
Are the magazines compatible with each other?
They are not.
Are the magazine wells the same size?
No.
So there's absolutely nothing interchangeable. And
Yes.
you think the term variant means something that's very similar to something else,
Yes.
but slightly different enough that it's similar enough to warrant it being called a variant of something.
Yeah.
They only look the same, no interchangeable parts, they're not similar in any functional way whatsoever.
No.
So that's our criteria to determine what a variant is.
Except if a gun is named as a variant in legislation.
Right, but I mean that in fact is what that's their criteria. As long as it kind of looks like it and we have the legal authority to do it, then that's what's going to happen, right?
That's what occurred at the time.
So why don't we do a little reclassification right now? Well, hang on. Pardon me with the muzzle direction. It doesn't really light anymore, but it looks like an AK. Using the RCMP's criteria, I would imagine that we could classify this as prohibited, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think it's prohibited as it stands. This is a replica.
Oh.
And being a replica of a modern centerfire rifle, made to do nothing else but resemble a modern centerfire rifle, the AK-47, those have also been prohibited since 1995, and I think you are in contravention of that particular regulation. This is a prohibited replica firearm.
Well, truth be told, and I want to be truthful, I've been driving around with that in the trunk. So you just witnessed a couple of things, and they're important things. For one, and I want to make this part quick, but you have to understand what's going on here. You saw the government of the day back in the early 90s say to millions of Canadians, millions and millions, some people think up to 5 million Canadians that were gun owners. Listen, don't be tinfoil hat, don't be conspiracy theorists, we don't want your guns. All we want you to do is be against gun violence. And how you can prove to us you're against gun violence and that you're a good citizen is just get a license. And then also, just tell us what you have. We want you to register your guns. Nobody wants your guns, conspiracy theorists. We just want to know what you have, because if your guns got stolen, we could track them, and then we would be able to get your guns back, right? That was the assertion. And, you know, we've seen what happened. As soon as they got enough people, they thought, hey, we've got a lot of people complying, so you get a bunch of PAL or PAOL holders. Then you got a bunch of people registering their guns. All the restricted firearms have been registered actually since 1934 anyway, but they added a bunch of guns into the restricted class so they could get them registered. And what do? They declare them variants or flip the classification to prohibited, and therefore we know you have it, you registered it, we're coming to get it. If you don't give it to us, there's problems. Anyway, the other thing that you saw was a bureaucracy that claimed dominion over a certain process in Canadian law, but they also act in an irrational manner quite often. And not only do they act in this irrational, unreasonable manner, but they threaten the use of force on the other side of it if you don't go along with it. And that's a real problem. Like, that's a serious, serious issue. I don't think people give this enough attention. So in this case, they're saying the AP-80, a firearm that has 0 interchangeable parts with an AK-47, they're like, oh yeah, it's a variant of the AK-47. It's a really similar firearm, therefore it's too dangerous to own. There's probably 1 million rimfire semi-automatic rifles in Canada. This is a firearm that you would give to your kids to shoot pop cans with, or old pots and pans, or shoot gophers, that are, in northern Alberta that are ripping up your field. That's what a firearm like this is for, shooting squirrels, that are wrecking your crops. Like, that's what it is. And they're telling you with a straight face, not only a straight face, but a threat, a veiled threat right behind it, this is an AK-47. So you can see this irresponsible use of regulation. It's really, really serious. Something else to consider is, what does a revocation look like these days? It comes in the form of a letter, and it says, we know this is your name, and we know you have this firearm because you registered it. You have 14 days to surrender this firearm for destruction, or you will be charged with unauthorized possession of prohibited firearm. Then when that 14 days elapses, God forbid you didn't give up that property based on this irrational request or demand. It's not a request, obviously, right? But when that happens, you know what happens to you? It's a gun call for prohibited firearm. They don't send an officer knocking on the door like, hey man, come on, what's the problem? It's ERT. So do I like it or do I agree with it? Absolutely not. I think it's a real issue, right? It's a real problem. But the problem really is in what it what it does to the relationship between citizens and the police. I happen to value that relationship greatly. And I have a lot of concern about what this type of stuff does to that relationship. I think people need to have a relationship with their government, that their government are the public servants. That we're losing that as well. So this is really important that we all become informed and that we all discuss this and we all take the time to talk about it and voice our concern about that, because we can't have this continue to happen. It's ripping us all apart from each other, right? And then you have anti-gun types that don't know these issues very well. This is why I'm making these videos, so that you understand these issues properly. And they're on the sidelines cheering, yeah, kick their door in. For what? Now the Supreme Court apparently has declared even the Daisy Red Ryder BB gun to be a firearm. Again, very serious issues. One last thing before I let you go. A close friend of mine submitted, based on my request, a Freedom of Information request to have the Canadian Firearms Centre and or the laboratory define what a variant is for me. You would think that if you had classified and used the term variant around 90 times to classify firearms, you would know what the definition of variant is, right? Like, you'd think that. You'd also think that if this was not an irrational use of this regulation, if this was completely legitimate, that you'd have no problem sharing with Canadians what your definition of variant is. But that was 8 months ago, and I haven't heard a word, not a peep from them. It seems that they don't have, a one-paragraph description of what variant is available to them. I personally have filed other Freedom of Information requests that were infinitely more complex and required a lot more work than that, and I've got them back already. I got those in 3 months. 8 months later, nothing. Just crickets chirping. Interesting. So, and that's a real issue too. Anyway, if you think that this is an isolated situation, just this one gun being reclassified inappropriately, watch my other video on firearm classification in the Legal Truth series, and you'll find that this is a widespread problem. As I mentioned, 90 times it was referred to in the regulation. So anyway, if you have experience, something to share, if you have questions, let's all help each other learn more about these topics. Please comment in the comment box below. You can follow us on Twitter at CivilAdvantage1, or you can find us on the web at www.civiladvantage.com. Thanks. Please share this video, and we'll see you next time.